Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Chavez. I'm going to be doing another part two videos. So this is going to be talking about economics, inflation, what's been going on actually since Joe Biden took office for this administration. So we've been hearing a lot of stuff in the news lately about gas prices, how this is Putin's gas hike, and inflation is attributed to corporate greed and corporate corruption. Basically, the administration is basically deflecting everything that they can away from their bad policies and deflecting it on everybody else and blaming everybody else for the problems that it's actually causing. However, I'm going to show you some charts here. So the first chart I'm going to bring up right here. It's going to show the inflation and how it's gone and I put the little pointer on there so you could see January of 2021. That was about when Joe Biden took office. It was at 1.4% for inflation, and now currently we are at about 8.5%. And if you couldn't see the little box there, but you could see the line going straight up. This comes from the U.S. Department of Bureau and Labor Statistics. So this is a government site. This is not some sort of blog or anything like this. This is what the actual government is actually putting out there, is what the inflation rate has been over the last year. Another thing that I would like to talk to you about is gas prices, something that we're all very much concerned about. Me driving a pickup truck, I am very concerned about gas prices because it costs a lot of money to put gas in that pickup. So one of the things that Biden says is that this is, and Jen Psaki has reiterated this, is that it's a Putin gas hike. However, this didn't start with Ukraine and Russia. This just started recently, within January, February of 2022. However, if you look at this chart that I'm going to put on the screen now, you're going to see that in January 2021, you're going to see exactly how high the gas prices have gone, and they've gone steadily up since Joe Biden took office. So what attributes this to the rising gas prices and the inflation? Well, we'll start first with the gas prices. So when Joe Biden first took office, here's some of the policies that he did that actually just raised gas prices. So one, he canceled the Keystone Pipeline, which was a U.S. pipeline that would help bring more oil and gas production in the United States and cause us to be less dependent on foreign oil. He also halted leasing programs in Anwar, basically Alaska, where we did a lot of our drilling to get oil. Also, he did a 60-day halt on all new leasing for oil and gas lines. He also did a 60-day halt on drilling permits for federal land, which attributes to about 25% of our oil production. Also, he directed all federal agencies to put a halt on fossil fuels. Also, he instituted new regulations on oil and gas and methane emissions. All of this was within probably the first week that he took office. And yet the Secretary of Energy said that none of these policies had any direct effect on what's going on with the gas prices. It's all Putin's fault, which is ridiculous because, as I showed you in the previous chart, the gas prices have been going up steadily since about February of 2021. So that is really the reason why gas prices are going up. As far as inflation, so this happened pretty much with the start of COVID. So in COVID in 2020, when everything hit around March, April, they started shutting down businesses. And this was temporary, and again, this was also under the Trump's administration too. But at the time, none of us really knew what this disease was going to do. We had no idea what the effects were, just how deadly it was. So a lot of businesses were put a halt on it. However, when studies did come out showing that it wasn't as virulent as we thought it was, and that the death rate was 0.07%, possibly even lower. I won't go into COVID situations because I'll be covering that on another video, because I believe that everybody can do their own risk assessment, and every U.S. citizen should be able to do what's best for them in their best interest. Whether or not they should get the vaccine or not, that is up to them and their primary care doctor. It should be left out of government hands. But anyway, for inflation, so we shut down industry, and once Joe Biden took over office, he kept wanting to shut down industry, and he kept putting restrictions on industry, mask mandates. Things needed to shut down, except for certain industries, which didn't make sense. But all of this caused basically stagflation. So what we did is we put a halt on everything, and then on top of that, because the government decided to shut down industry, what they did is they decided to pass bills so they could give stipends to people who weren't working, which is actually what they should do. If the government prevents you from working, then they should come up with some sort of compensation. But what it should be is temporarily, because if you have a temporary measure in place, that's what it should be until you figure out what's going on. However, what the Biden administration did is they shut down, and they kept shutting down, and then they started paying people to stay home. Well, when you pay people to stay home, then it affects your GDP, because your gross domestic product is basically what the country produces. So what inflation, technically by definition, is too much money chasing too little goods and services. So when you shut down the economy, you have very little goods and services being produced by the United States, and you're paying people to stay home, so there's no incentive for them to go back to work. So this is what's causing our GDP to go down. Biden administration blames this on corporate greed, saying because he increased the corporate tax rate to 34%, that corporations are deflecting this to the American people, which is absolute nonsense. If you go buy anything, if you buy anything for $4.99, do you expect to pay exactly $4.99 for that item? No, because sales tax is implemented into the cost of that purchase. Just like corporate tax, just like anything that's an overhead for any business or corporation is automatically input into the price of those goods or services. So corporate tax is something that's implemented as part of the overhead that the Americans pay. So when the government says we're going to raise corporate tax and we're going to tax corporations, that's an absolute lie. What it is we, the American people, are absorbing that cost. It has nothing to do with corporate greed, because that's part of what is absorbed into the overhead for the cost of those goods and services. The U.S. government knows that, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to say that what they're taxing corporations and not the American people, which is, they know it's not true. They are doing it in a way where they can say we're actually taxing corporations, but what they're really doing is they're taxing the American people. So back to inflation a little bit. So Milton Friedman has described inflation of the product of two things, and two things only. One is government spending, and two, because of government spending, they pass policy to print money to make up for that. So that's basically all it is the government passes these bills and policies. They bundle these huge bills. They spend way too much beyond what their means are. And then because of that, they have to print money to catch up to everything that they overspent on. So basically think of it like a teenager with a credit card who maxes out their credit card, and then they ask their parents or the company to increase their credit limit. So the credit limit gets increased. The debt doesn't go away, but their credit limit gets increased. Same with and then what happens when your credit limit gets increased? Your interest rate usually goes up on top of that if you max out your credit card. Same with inflation. So if you spend more than what you take in for the country, then you have to print money. And so now that doesn't attribute to the goods and services that we are producing, because we put policies in place to stop people from working and to stay home. So we're not exporting as much. So our GDP is going down, because now we have to pay people by printing money to pay them to stay home. Another way you can think of this is, so let's say, I don't have one available, but let's say I have a very rare comic book from Stanley. Stanley unfortunately passed away. But let's say I had a number one Spider-Man comic book. Let's say I had the one of 5 that was only signed by Stan Lee. How much do you think the value of that comic is? Pretty high, especially since he passed away. However, let's say there's 50,000 of those comic books and 30,000 were signed by Stan Lee. Now what do you think the value of that comic book is? It's the same thing with money and expenditures. If you print too much money, the value of that money, the value of the dollar actually goes down. Same with the comic book. It's not as valuable if you have too much of it and you don't have enough goods and services to attribute the cost of that. So that's basically inflation and the gas prices in a nutshell. I can go into this a little bit deeper. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. Put any responses, in the comment section below. But this is why the Biden administration does not know what they're doing, because what is their resolve to all this? What is their resolve to inflation? They want to spend more money. They want to pass another 1.7, 1.9 trillion stimulus package. They say to boost the economy, which is absolutely insane, because any economist worth their salt is going to know that if you pump more money into an already inflated society, you're just going to drive up the cost of inflation. So right now we're at 8.5%. And if they keep doing this, there is no doubt in my mind we're going to go up to 10, 12, maybe even 14%, just like we did see in the Carter administration back in the 1970s. So something I could also talk to you about is inflation, how this was also studied, and it was also studied in Japan in 1971. So in 1971, what the Japanese government was doing was they were printing a lot of money with their policies and pumping that into the economy. So everything looked good for a while. So around 1972, that's when people noticed that the price, the value of their dollar was not worth as much because everything was going up with inflation. So what the Japanese government did is they did something smart. They put a halt on their policies pumping more money into the economy. So they had to scale back on the amount of money that they're putting into the economy. So what happens is, for the next couple of years, so end of 72, 73, are some pretty rough years, especially 73 and beginning of 74, because that's when the money production is not being pumped in. But however, inflation is going up because it still takes about 8 to 12 months for the numbers of inflation to catch up with what the economy is actually doing. So it's not until about mid 74 to 75 that things start to stabilize a little bit, as long as the Japanese government kept on track. So about 1976 or so, that's when finally everything leveled out and inflation came back down, and the price of the Japanese currency actually was a little bit more valuable of what it used to be. But however, it took 5 years in order for the Japanese government to get a hold of that and figure that out. So what's happening with us is we see our administration doesn't even have a handle on that. What they're trying to pump more money into the economy, like I said, which is crazy. So if it took Japan roughly around 5 years to get a handle on that, I mean, how long is it going to take us if we don't have good people making good policies to try and reverse that? Another way to attribute this is for inflation, to relate it, is sort of like alcoholism. I know this is kind of a rough example, but alcoholism is the same as kind of inflation. So when you're an alcoholic and you drink, you drink basically to feel normal. So if you stop drinking, you have the negative effects of alcoholism. Just like inflation, if you stop printing money, then you have the negative effects of what the economy does with inflation. So as long as you keep printing money, you kind of keep at that stable plateau, just like an alcoholic. As long as they keep drinking, they're going to stave off those negative effects of the detox that comes afterwards. However, once an alcoholic or an economist or the United States realizes that the best thing they do is to correct this action, they're going to have to make the hard choices in order to bring that pain that's going to come. So with an alcoholic, they have to stop drinking. And the effects are is then they have to go through detox, and that takes a while. And that's the negative effects. That's the painful part until they can start to feel normal again. Just like with the inflation crisis that we're going on, once we stop printing money and putting out these policies to pump more money into the economy, we're going to feel that because inflation is still going to go up. We're going to feel those really bad negative effects, and it's going to take a while before we can start to feel normal again with our economy. Anyway, if you have any questions, let me know, and I will be talking to you again real soon. Thank you. Have a good night.